So here's a question to start us off. What if the biggest thing holding back real lasting growth and influence, in ministry or mission isn't passion or even money? What if it's actually much simpler? Isolation.
Yeah. You see so many gifted, really dedicated leaders working incredibly hard, but they're in these silos. They pour everything they have into their immediate world, but the impact, it stays contained. It's like addition, sure, but it never quite breaks through to multiplication.
Right, and that's the tension, isn't it? That core problem we see highlighted in the source material we're looking at today.
Absolutely. We see these movements, these ministries, they shine really brightly for a season. But then, maybe the founder moves on or the culture shifts dramatically. And because it was isolated, that flame just sort of flickers out instead of spreading.
So our mission in this deep dive is really to unpack that. How do we unlock a genuinely self-sustaining movement?
Exactly. And the key that comes through loud and clear from these sources is moving beyond that solo effort. It's about co-laboring intentionally in a living, connected network.
What's really struck me is that this isn't some, newfangled management idea from the latest bestseller.
No, not at all.
We're actually talking about rediscovering something foundational, almost like the original DNA of how movements are supposed to work.
Yeah, it's right there in the historical accounts. This pattern of interconnected, deeply relational leadership, it's what gave the early church its dynamism.
It was baked into the system from the very beginning.
Right from the start. You see it everywhere. Think about the leaders getting together in Jerusalem, the council, right? Dealing with major crises that cut across different contexts. Or look at Paul's ministry. He wasn't just planting standalone churches. He was intentionally weaving together this network of connected nodes, not isolated little dynasties.
And the need for this today, it feels more urgent than ever, doesn't it? Culture's shifting so fast. We're dealing with digital everything.
Yeah.
The fallout from the pandemic, political divides, these really complex generational handoffs. The leaders who are going to navigate this successfully, well, they won't be the ones just guarding their own little patch.
No way.
They'll be the ones deliberately linking arms, actually championing each other across those patches of territory.
Then if we just, look squarely at the core problem the sources identify, it's the steep cost of that silo mentality. Great local churches, great ministries, they end up unintentionally containing their own impact, putting invisible fences around it.
And the results are predictable, sadly. Leader burnout, which is huge. Vision gets fragmented.
Yeah, and often this subtle sense of competition creeps in instead of genuine collaboration.
So isolation doesn't just limit the reach. It limits the lifespan, too. It's not sustainable.
Right.
So, okay, if we accept that networking isn't just a nice optional strategy, but it's actually necessary, well, you can't just tell people, go network. We need the why, the foundation.
Exactly. And this is where we have to get theological for a moment because it really reframes everything. At the heart of Christian theology, you have a relational God, Father, Son, Spirit, existing in this dynamic mutual love and interdependence. So the sources argue pretty strongly that when leaders network, it's not just good organizational practice. It's fundamentally theological work. You're actually re-embedding the church, the way we operate, into the very nature of God himself.
Wow, that idea, the Trinitarian model for networking, that really elevates the whole conversation, doesn't it?
It does.
It means that working in isolation is, in a way, a kind of theological contradiction. It goes against the grain of a God who is inherently relational.
Precisely. And the sources use this fascinating phrase, ecclesiology as ecology.
Ecclesiology is ecology. Okay.
Yeah. The church isn't meant to be just a collection of separate fortified buildings. It's supposed to function like an ecosystem. Each local congregation is like a cell, an interdependent part of a larger organism that's designed inherently to reproduce life.
So sending leaders, planting churches in that view, it's mirroring the outward sending, missional impulse that's right there in the nature of the Trinity.
That's the idea.
Okay, I get the theological why, but let's get practical. How does this God concept actually translate into, faster, more effective results on the ground? What are the deep mechanics here? What makes a network spark that chain reaction, instead of just being a series of polite conferences once a year?
Well, the sources point to 4 really crucial functional principles. First up is proximity of trust.
Okay, trust.
And this trust, it's not just a warm, fuzzy feeling, it's a functional lever.
Hmm.
When leaders genuinely trust each other deeply, friction just plummets. Suddenly, you can swap key people during a crisis, you can share sensitive financial data, you can reproduce leadership much faster because you don't need a 6-month bureaucratic review for every little decision.
That makes total sense. Trust cuts through the red tape. It speeds everything up. But let's be real about the perceived cost here. For leaders used to running their own show, that next mechanism, resource pooling, can sound like losing control.
Oh, absolutely. That's a huge hurdle for many.
So what do the sources say to reassure leaders? How do you maintain local autonomy while still sharing assets effectively?
That's a critical tension, and the sources tackle it by emphasizing shared leverage, not centralized control. So imagine a small church, really strapped for cash, needing maybe, I don't know, a $10,000 graphics budget for a new digital outreach. Alone, impossible,
Right.
but pooled. Maybe 10 congregations each chip in $1,000 to a shared fund that benefits everyone. Suddenly, the impossible becomes a shared win. The whole point is creating leverage that's beyond the reach of any single group on its own.
So it's about achieving collective scale, not someone telling you how to spend your local offering.
Exactly. And the other two pieces fit right in. You need a shared language and values. That allows for alignment without someone having to micromanage because everyone fundamentally agrees on the core DNA. And then, crucially, distributed leadership. Authority isn't hoarded at the top, it's intentionally spread out. Leaders in a healthy network are constantly reproducing other leaders who are just as empowered, not just creating dependent congregations, always looking back to the founder.
That paints a really clear picture of why this structure can be so powerful. We've got the theory, the blueprints, but sometimes the story just makes it click. Tell us about this example from the sources Anna, David, and Maria. What happens when this theory actually hits the streets?
Okay, yeah, let's use that narrative vignette. It's quite illustrative. Picture 3 small, quite different congregations, all on the margins of a city. You've got Anna, she's leading in a dense university district. Then there's David, focused on an old manufacturing neighborhood. And Maria, she's serving recent immigrant communities.
Okay, so all challenging contexts, likely places where resources are pretty thin on the ground.
Exactly. So they commit to meet just once a month, 90 minutes, over coffee. That's it. And they're not just comparing attendance numbers, they're actually sharing teaching materials. They're coaching apprentice leaders across their different congregations. They're even volunteering together on citywide projects.
So practical collaboration. Like Anna invites David to do a quick training for her university group.
Precisely. And maybe David coaches Maria's apprentice on setting up care teams. And Maria, in turn, connects her community's resources to a big outreach where Anna's students are volunteering.
And this is where that trust factor comes in again, right?
Yeah,
The friction is low because the relationship is high.
you got it.
So what did this kind of exchange actually produce in their case?
Well, within about 2 years, Maria's apprentice felt ready, fully equipped, and they started a new house church in a nearby town. And significantly, it was partly supported financially by the pooled training resources from the network.
Oh.
The aha moment in the story is this. The multiplication didn't kick off because of a huge grant or some famous speaker. It started with shared prayer, mutual sending, that willingness to actually release leaders, not hoard them. What spread was the culture of trust and reproducibility. That was more potent than strategy or capital alone.
That's the goal, isn't it? That kind of exponential growth that's fueled by relationship, not just top-down directives. So if a leader listening right now wants to start weaving this kind of network tapestry like tomorrow morning, what are the absolute minimum viable structures they need?
The sources are refreshingly clear on this. They offer a kind of reproducible playbook. First, you need leaders' tables.
Leaders' tables. Okay.
8 quarterly gatherings. Pastors, planters, key leaders, they come together not to compare spreadsheets, but specifically to connect and exchange value. The focus is usually threefold. Sharing testimonies or stories, a very short, targeted training piece, maybe 20-30 minutes max, and then this crucial segment called requests and offers.
It's interesting that the sources emphasize short training, not like a 4-hour deep dive curriculum.
Yeah.
Why that focus on exchange and brevity?
Because the primary goal is relational glue and sustainability, not just downloading information. The short training introduces shared language, common concepts, without burying people in homework. It keeps the barrier to entry low.
Right.
But that requests and offers part, that's the functional heart. It forces interdependence. Hey, who needs a good template for premarital counsel? Oh, I've got one. Who needs volunteers for their outreach event Saturday? We can send 5 people.
It forces the network to actually behave like a network,
Yeah.
sharing resources and needs in real time.
Exactly. Then, building on that, you need the accountability piece. Peer coaching circles.
Yeah.
These are small groups, intentional cohorts, usually maybe 3 to 5 leaders, and they commit to mutual coaching, yes, but also real accountability. This is where that iron sharpens iron idea gets practical. And it's holistic. They talk ministry plans, sure, but also spiritual health, emotional well-being, family life.
These sound like the relational shock absorbers, the things that actually prevent leaders from burning out in isolation.
That's a great way to put it. They absolutely are. And then, to make sure this whole thing has legs and lasts beyond the current group, you have to address succession.
Where the Pauline model you mentioned earlier, it requires being intentional about raising up the next wave.
Which brings us to mentorship and succession. Healthy networks don't just happen. They intentionally train and then release leaders. Our sources actually detail a pretty specific 12-18-month leadership development pipeline. It moves people through distinct phases: discovery, formation, launch readiness, and then post-launch support.
Why that 12 to 18-month window? Is there a specific warning in the sources about rushing that launch readiness part? Or is the bigger danger actually holding on to promising leaders for too long?
That's a great question. The sources seem clear that the primary danger is rushing the formation phase. This isn't just about skills, it's deeply about character development, resilience. That time frame, 12 to 18 months, usually ensures an apprentice has walked through a full cycle of ministry seasons with the mentor, maybe faced a crisis or two, learned how to process failure within the safety of that network relationship.
So it's about readiness, not just competence.
Exactly. And then authority must be delegated. It has to be reproducible, just like Paul sending Timothy or Titus out, fully authorized to replicate the structures and the DNA elsewhere.
Thinking about Paul again, his model relied heavily on timely communication, didn't it? Those letters were the relational glue across distances.
Absolutely vital.
So, since we're not usually sending letters by courier anymore, how do we replicate that essential function today?
Yeah.
Digitally, I assume.
Yeah, online forums or communication platforms are basically non-negotiable today. They become these essential relational lifelines. They function as digital ecosystems for real-time support, sharing resources instantly, document templates, training toolkits, posting urgent prayer needs. It really is the modern, scalable version of the early church's letter-writing network, connecting leaders who might be cities or even countries apart.
Okay, this all paints a very positive, almost utopian picture. But networks involve people, and people bring baggage, and structures can have unintended consequences. What are some of the common dangers or pitfalls the sources warn us about when we try to build these kinds of systems?
That's crucial, because networks built without wisdom can definitely cause harm. The number one risk mentioned repeatedly is the personality cult.
Right, dependence on one charismatic figure.
Exactly. The network's health has to be rooted in shared theological values, agreed upon DNA, not just loyalty to one dynamic leader. The sources are blunt. If the movement stalls the minute the founder steps aside, it wasn't a true network to begin with. It was just a fan club.
I see that. But there's a tension here, isn't there? The sources also talk about guarding against cultural imperialism. If you have, say, a core group of well-resourced churches in the network, constantly sending money and leaders to a newer, maybe cross-cultural context.
Yeah.
How do you stop them from just unconsciously exporting their own preferred style, their music, their meeting format, their leadership structures?
That is the critical tightrope walk, balancing shared vision with local contextual freedom. The network leadership has to be vigilant, sending resources, sending people. It cannot mean imposing form. Contextualization isn't optional. It's essential missional work. The sources basically say if the new church plant looks identical to the sending church stylistically, the network hasn't actually released it to its unique mission field. It's just colonized it.
And the resources themselves can become the tool of that unintended control, creating unhealthy power dynamics.
For sure. Which leads to the next pitfall. Actively avoiding resource imbalance. You don't want that predator-prey dynamic where one or two wealthy nodes essentially call all the shots for the poorer ones. The antidote. Transparent stewardship, emphasizing genuinely pooled resources, not just one-way grants based on relationship. Resources need to flow towards the agreed-upon mission need, not just follow the money trail.
Makes sense. And finally, the sources seem acutely aware that isolation doesn't just limit impact, it often crushes the leader personally. Beyond just saying, remember to rest, what specific safeguards do these healthy networks build in to combat burnout?
They build accountability for rest right into the structure. It's not just encouraged, it's expected and checked. Sabbath rhythms are woven into the network's culture. Leaders in those peer coaching circles, they get asked pointed questions. When was your last actual day off? What significant responsibilities did you truly delegate this past week? The network protects its leaders by intentionally distributing the load and collectively insisting that only healthy leaders can sustain healthy movements long term.
That flows right into measurement then. We know the easy metrics, butts in seats, dollars in the plate, but those are often shallow. The sources call them vanity metrics. How do we measure the actual health, the real multiplication of an ecosystem like this? We need indicators that truly matter.
The whole focus has to shift from counting addition to tracking reproduction. Are we seeing reproducible fruit? So first, you measure reproducible leaders trained and released. How many apprentices actually completed that 12-18-month pipeline and are now leading independently somewhere else?
So not just people you mentored who stayed on your staff, but leaders who were genuinely sent out and are now generating new life elsewhere.
Exactly. Second, you track new worshiping communities started. And crucially, their sustainability. Are they still viable at the 6-month mark, the 12-month mark? This tells you something about the quality of the equipping and sending process.
Right.
And maybe the most telling sign of overall network vitality is tracking leaders sent and received, actual cross-pollination. A youth pastor from Anna's church goes to plant with David's network. Maria sends a worship leader to help Anna's group for 3 months. That flow, that movement between the nodes, that's the sign of a truly living, healthy ecosystem.
When you look back historically, that chain reaction, the kind that leads to significant multiplication, it didn't usually come from some central 5-year plan.
Or rarely.
It emerged more organically through these relational pathways. People traveling, writing letters, praying together, sharing what they had.
Yeah, and if we connect all these dots, looking at the big picture from the sources, the next great wave of movement, it probably won't be sparked by a single wildly charismatic figure or a massive capital campaign. It's far more likely to emerge from these networks of connected leaders who genuinely champion each other's success, who model shared responsibility, who practice relational maturity. That's how you turn isolated sparks into a fire that can actually sustain itself.
So wrapping this up, what does this mean for that leader listening right now who feels that weight, that sense of being effective maybe, but ultimately alone?
Well, it poses a pretty significant question, doesn't it? The real question isn't should leaders connect. It's what are the consequences if they don't? Are we okay with the momentum potentially dying down when our personal energy or season ends? Or are we committed to building something, this ecosystem, this tapestry of interdependent leaders that keeps reproducing long after we've moved on?
That really is the legacy question. And we can't wait for the perfect system to magically appear. I love that the source material ends with this really simple, practical challenge, a specific first step for you listening right now. Tonight, just name one other leader you could invite into a simple monthly 90-minute huddle. Focus on that exchange, maybe a short shared learning piece, and then commit to pray for one person you can intentionally begin to apprentice, thinking about that 12 to 18-month journey. That's it. That's how you start weaving the very first thread of this network tapestry.